Hello and thank you for attending my PowerPoint presentation on break teams, the whole archetype. So when you weakness break an enemy, they take break damage. So these teams aim to maximize this damage. Before 2.2, there was one huge flaw in break archetypes. No matter how fast you break the enemy, you can't really do damage afterwards. And then you still have to wait for the enemy to recover before you can break it again. By 2.3, Super Break was introduced, which solved that problem. When dealing toughness damage to an enemy that is already broken, it does break effect scaling damage, which is absolutely huge. By the way, if you want to know more about the break and the Super Break formula, I made a video on that. You can check it out. Most break teams have a structure pretty similar to hyper carry teams. 1 carry, 2 supports, and a sustain. Unlike hyper carry teams though, all 4 do significant to insane damage, even the pure supports and sustains, which is wild to think about. I'll actually start with the support, which there are 3 main ones, which are Run-Mei, Hardblazer, and Fugue. Run-Mei gives all allies a passive 50% weakness break efficiency with their skill, 20% passive break effect, and 25% all-type res ped with her ult, which are all different and very helpful multipliers for break teams. Hardblazer allows all allies to do super break damage on her ult, as well as a break effect buff. She also gets further break effect based on 15% of her own break effect with E4, and is also completely free to play up to E6. It just costs your sanity and patience to explore instead of your stellar jades. Hardblazer is, as of right now, before Fugue's release, the only source of 100% super break damage. The only other sources of super break damage, at least off the top of my head, are Fireflies and Rappas, which are both not 100%. Based on what we know from the 2.7 stream, Fugue allows all allies to do super break damage and exo toughness. As we know from 2.5's MOC with Exo Toughness is absolutely obscene for Rappa and Himiko, and is also great for most other break-based characters. I'll go by element this time, so Physical is tied with Fire for the highest initial break multiplier, and is represented by only Boot Hill. Boot Hill is the first limit to 5-star to spearhead the break meta. He does huge toughness damage, and due to his nature, his builds usually run very fast. If the enemy is already broken when he finishes his enhanced basics, he does a fudging ton of break damage, which is based on his already high physical break damage, because like I said, Physical is tied with Fire for the highest break damage multiplier. And since he can deal high break damage based on the already high physical break damage after the initial break, he is, in my opinion, I'm pretty sure, the only break carry that could be considered viable without super break. So this video was another excuse for me to talk more about Firefly. Firefly does so much toughness damage that she can both break enemies quickly and deal obscene super break damage once they're already broken. I feel like she was made to work perfectly with Hardblazer, which is, you know, the canonically accurate ship. You can also easily implant fire weakness on enemies that don't already have them, which also massively benefit Lingsha and Gallagher, and also Himiko when in Pure Fiction. Speaking of Himiko, she also does well with a break-oriented build. Because her talent gains charges when enemies are broken, it can break, then the follow-up can immediately do super break. She also does well with exo toughness against a few elites like past, present, and future in 2.5's MOC. Since the follow-up will immediately trigger whenever an elite is broken, and can promptly and immediately do super break damage. While the Exo Toughness provides enough charge stacks to trigger it consistently enough, even outside of Pure Fiction. And in Break Pure Fictions it's even more insane. The 2 break-oriented sustains, which are Lingsha and Gallagher, are also fire. Gallagher was the first one, who was released in 2.1 alongside Acheron. His healing increases with break effect. It doesn't scale with break effect, it increases with break effect. What I mean by this is that it's just flat scaling and he gains outgoing healing based on break effect, which is pretty funny. So he's incentivized to build break effect anyway, and his ult into enhanced basic combo does a ton of toughness damage and by proxy super break damage. He doesn't have a cleanse at E0, but his E1 gives him 50% effect res and its E2 gives him a cleanse on his skill plus more effect res on the target, which is really nice. 100% effect res is also very achievable, like my Gallagher has 100% effect res, which is very comfy to play. It's really nice being able to more or less completely ignore status conditions. Lucia is the newest and most premium one. Her ult gives break vulnerability and she gains attack and outgoing healing based on her break effects. She also does a lot of toughness damage, especially when you factor in AoE, and has plenty of cleanses. In Pure Fiction, she can act as the main carry, being supported by Firefly. So Quantum and Imaginary only have one character each, which are Shui for Quantum and Rappa for Imaginary. Shui was released in 1.6 alongside Runway. She gains damage bonus equal to her break effect, so she does alright personal damage on top of toughness damage. Her follow-ups are based on reducing toughness though, and while Super Break allows her to do damage, it can't trigger her follow-up since that skill's on actually reducing the toughness, not converting it to Super Break damage wouldn't count. I'm not very sure whether it counts exo toughness though. I don't know anyone who knows that for sure. Also, Shui, I forgot to mention, can ignore toughness on her ult, and I believe with Eidolon she can also ignore toughness with her follow-up. Meanwhile, on the imaginary side, Rappa gets 1 charge whenever an enemy is broken by an ally, up to 10 charges, which, after the 3rd hit of Enhanced Basics, deals 60% of her imaginary break damage per charge up to 600%. Though, based on my experience, you'll rarely actually hit 10 charges, you're mostly going to be hovering over like 4 to 5 charges, which makes it closer to about 300%. Which you can do big damage despite Imaginary's low break damage multiplier. Her Enhanced Basics also ignore weakness types for half the toughness damage, which is important because she's a limited 5-star, she can't just be stonewalled by anything that's not Imaginary weak. For Relics, we have Tifa Shooting Meteor, which was the first one and was regarded as very mid for the longest times, and it was just one of those sets that would just drop from weekly bosses that you would kinda ignore. It gives an unconditional 32% break effect and then 3 energy whenever you break. This is still good in Pure Fiction for Rappa and probably Break Himiko. Iron Cavalry is the newest, generally best break set. 10% defense ignore on all break is really good, and 25% for super break is really good too. Obviously this is tailored for Firefly, and especially with her E1, which stacks more def ignore, but most if not all other break characters use it pretty well too. Watchmaker, Master of Dream Machinations, is the go-to support set for break supports like Ramei and Harmblazer. It gives 16% break effect to the wearer and then 30% to all allies for 2 turns when ulting. It can't stack, though having multiple characters with this set does allow for better uptime. Talia Kingdom of Banditry gives 16% break effect passively, then extra 30% if their speed is 145 or above. This was also mid for the longest time until the actual break meta came along. This is the go-to for break characters unless they use Forge. Forge of the Kalpagni Lantern gives 6% speed and then gives 40% break effect for 1 turn if you're hitting an enemy with fire weakness. This is obviously tailored for Firefly, but Gallagher can use it pretty well too, because more often than not you want to be playing him against fire weak enemies as well because the high toughness damage. So in general, 40% break effect and 6% speed is generally better than 46% break effect. Aside from signature light cones, there are barely any light cones that buff break effect directly. In recent patches, they have introduced 1 4-star cone for each DPS path, and also Memories of the Past, which has been here since 1.0, and What is Real, that have break effect for Harmony and Abundance respectively. But before these, or if you don't own any of these because these are all gacha cones, there aren't that many light cone options because break damage doesn't scale with attack percent, it doesn't scale with damage bonus, it doesn't scale with crit at all. So even 3-star options are on the table since base stats don't matter for damage output. In particular, Adversarial from the Hunt at S5 gives 18% speed for 2 turns whenever taking a kill, Policy from Erudition gives, I believe, 12 energy on using a skill, which are really good because while they can't directly boost break damage, they can increase the frequency of your attacks via just speed in general or ults. There's none for destruction though, which is a shame. There is mission cogs for harmony and multiplication for abundance, but well, granted, those two are much more widely used since those pods generally aren't made to do huge damage anyway, and so they don't really need the base stats as much. Like Gallagher just uses multiplication in general to generate more skill points. There aren't that many break buffs in Simulated Universe except Unknowable Domain, which personally speaking, Unknowable Domain isn't super fun because your characters basically don't matter. Your characters are just there to kind of be deceptors, so it's not that fun in my opinion, but there are a ton of break buffs in Divergent Universe. The main break buff is Destruction. There is 1 3-star, 3 2-star, and 2 1-star destruction blessings that buff break directly for a total of 6 blessings, which doesn't sound like a lot until you consider equations and weighted curios. Speaking of equations, there are also 1 3-star, 2 2-star, and 2 1-star equations that are focused on break, all of which have destruction as the path with the most required blessings, or as I like to call it, the main path. There's also Night Beyond Pyre, which increases weakness break efficiency by 30%, and Hell's Other People, which does 140% of the break damage to adjacent targets after breaking, from Nihility, and Sovereign Skybreaker, which is the famous 100% action advance after weakness break from the Hunt, which are very, very useful in break builds and super break builds. There are enemies that can protect their toughness, which are more often than not a hard counter. When a weakness is protected, not even implanting weakness or ignoring weakness types can reduce the toughness. This is also different from bosses in Apocalyptic Shadow that just have no weaknesses. There is also more off-meta and less explicit super break and break options like Hunt March 7th, Xushang, and Luca, and probably a few others I can't really remember while writing this. So I mainly wanted to just cover the more direct and explicit ones, though maybe I should have covered Hunt March 7th. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, do like and subscribe. I went into a lot more detail for this one and put in even more effort than I usually do, and I hope it shows. Let me know what topic you want me to cover next, because I'm frankly out of ideas. Alright, bye.